It's as unique as your DNA. It's completely yours, and there's no two human beings have ever been breathing the same way, which is why it's so intrinsically connected to the past and to your trauma, because your autonomic nervous system uses it as a tool to mobilize you to get you back to safety. And how does it do that? Well, it picks the thing that makes you frightened the most, because that's the most reliable source of where you don't want to go back to.
Yes, people, how we doing? Quick intro to this one. I'm just letting you know, living in the van full time, going to be doing some separate videos on van life. So this is the podcast studio, it's the office, it's the home for now. As what better way to do it than in the UK in the winter? So I'm going to be uploading some videos of how things are going over the course of me living in a van. And today's episode is Breatheolution. Super excited to put this one out, and I'm going to be doing a lot more podcasts in person as I travel around the country and interview people, getting people in the van, talking truth, talking health, talking how to live a bit more of a fulfilling, meaningful life, and all sorts of other things. So subscribe if you can, and if you are interested to find out more about these types of conversations. I've also got a locals community. You can hit the links in the bio below. That is all for now. Enjoy the episode. Breatheolution, Kevin O'Neill, doing some amazing work in the Peak District and all over the UK. So holding some valuable space for people to go on their own journeys. And he's doing breath work and cold water therapy in what I believe is the right way. So thank you. Enjoy the episode.
Yeah, cheers, man. Thanks for inviting me here. And,
Cheers. Thanks for coming, Chris.
Being up for connecting.
Sure,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah, man.
That's what it's all about.
It is. So, what a lovely space you've got here.
Yeah.
How long have you been here, first of all?
Well, I've only been at this spot since about sort of, what time was it this year? Maybe July. I've been at this spot. I was a bit further down the river before that. And
Downstream. You're moving upstream.
Downstream, yeah. And Paul and Sally, the people who own that house, that £1 million house there, they said that they just come and use this space here, and I just rent the space off them.
Beautiful.
But yeah, and it's right on the river, so it's ideal, really.
Yeah, it's convenient. There's no
Sure.
excuses. It's right there.
Yeah. I mean, in the spring and summer here, it was beautiful. Really, it was a lovely place to be, and it's lovely now.
It is. Yeah.
It's
the seasons are changing.
Sure, it's gone cold, and it's going to get colder, but that's part and parcel of it. It's warm in here now, obviously, with this lovely fire that we've got going. But
Thanks, you appreciate it. The other morning, I was having quite a low morning, and I really had to force myself to get out, get moving. And I jumped in the river, and for the rest of the day, I was just so grateful for the cold. I was like bringing it on. I was like calling it in. I was like, I can't wait to get even more cold, and I was looking forward to the winter even more, just from getting in the river that morning.
Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it? And I think it, excuse me, when you start to use the cold, you start to get in the cold, and your body starts to adapt. It changes your whole outlook of the cold, And I was definitely one of those people that hated the cold. I couldn't stand it. And the first time I got into it, I did what most people do when they first get in the cold. Your breath gets taken away, and you run off. You get out because it's a bit too overwhelming. But once your body starts to adapt, it completely changes your outlook on it. Really. It's amazing, really. It's an amazing tool.
Yeah, you never get good at it. That's the one thing I keep saying.
It's merciless. Like Wim Hof says, it's merciless but merciful at the same time.
Love that.
Yeah. And it's fashionably reliable because it's always cold.
Yes. You can always count on it.
Always. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so tell me a bit about your journey. Well, what life was growing up? Where was that? Have you always been in the peaks or close by? And how did you get into understanding more about the power of breathing in the cold? Okay,
so basically, I'm from Stockport originally, and I moved up to the peaks maybe about sort of 20 odd years ago when I just had my first son, and I've always been sort of in this area around the Peak District, and that when you kind of live here, though, you just sort of take it for granted a little bit, don't you? Nature. But how I got into it was a bit unusual, really, just by chance, really, that I got into it, and I do this sort of, you know, for a living now. Whereas I just started to take people into the cold initially, and there wasn't really much breathwork connected to that, apart from some very early sort of Wim Hof or Tumo style breathing techniques initially, cyclic hyperventilation. Although I didn't know it was that then. I was just doing Wim Hof breathing and taking people into the reservoir. But sort of just going back a little bit further, I've had ADHD, I think, all my life. I've not been diagnosed with ADHD, but in terms of what that is, I think that's what I've always had all the way through school, etc. Really struggled with my breathing, been asthmatic all my life, and nobody ever sort of told me to breathe through my nose, believe it or not. You know, my doctor never told me to, yet that's what I'm constantly griping at everybody to do these days, is to breathe through the organ that is for breathing, which is the nose. So I ended up sort of breathing through my mouth all the way through my life, and was always a bit behind with sports. I tried to, but I was always wheezing and coughing, and my heart was always racing because I was always hyperventilating constantly. And then that sort of led on to issues, sleep issues as a kid, I think, as well. And then I got addiction. I had trouble with addiction, so I was an alcoholic for maybe nearest damn it about 18 years.
Wow.
And yeah, when I was drinking, I wasn't great. I wasn't always a reliable dad. I wasn't always a reliable husband, and but you know, it got to a point where I realised that I've probably just got to, you know, knock this on the head, otherwise it's going to kill me. And then something happened. Then I lost my sister in 2019, Yvonne. She was only 49, and I kind of watched her die in hospital. And it was enough, really, just to sort of push me over the edge. And I thought, I just need to stop. And it was probably the hardest thing to do. I've had addictions with cocaine, and you know, I've been smoking weed and all sorts of stuff, and done loads of different types of drugs over the years.
What was your lifestyle back then, when you were like in the real mix of that addiction?
I think, to be honest, Chris, I was just existing as opposed to living and just waiting for the next fix, really. And although trying to make my way through life, or Kev was trying to make his way through life, because I think there was two of me. I think there was this alcoholic, sort of addictive personality, me, and then there was Kev that was sort of always in there just trying to get out sometimes. And I think that's kind of what I found when I started to do the Wim Hof breathing, when I started to breathe and change my biochemistry with my own breath. The first time I did it, I cried, and I had no idea why. But I just, it allowed me to connect to my body in a way that I'd never done before. You know, I really felt me, and I saw me, and that was very emotional. And you know, from that point, I thought, there's something in this. You know, there really is. I think I'd read Wim Hof's book, or most of his book, Becoming the Iceman. I read that, you know, a little bit previous to sort of finding breathwork myself. But like I say, somebody said to me, you need to just give up drinking for a year. I thought, well, I'm not going to do a year, I'll do 6 months. But I was already lining up my drinks for Christmas, so I thought, no, I need to just quit for a year. And that was life-changing, yeah. Once I was allowed to be without it for that amount of time, it completely changed my life.
What was sort of missing, would you say, from your life then, that perhaps you have now? You know, what was the alcohol and the addiction like allowing you to achieve, I guess?
Yeah, I don't think I could really be me when I was under the influence of alcohol, because everything revolved around the booze. Everywhere that I went, it was always about drink. Everywhere we went on holiday, you know, where's this? Where's the bars? Where's the places we can get drink from? Is there an off license? Is there somewhere to, you know, when we go for a walk somewhere? Oh, there's a pub at the end, and You know, any family occasion, you know, even my family wouldn't even invite me to certain occasions because they knew I'd get drunk and gnarly and be an argumentative, loud and a lot of fun. But then it changes, you know, the more I used to drink, it used to turn into anger and aggression and not just, I wasn't very nice, Chris, not a nice person to be around. Which seems completely alien now.
Yeah, was the awareness there then?
No, I wasn't. I wasn't connected at all then, and I had no idea. I absolutely had no idea. You know what I was doing to my body. I found myself reading books about the nervous system, about your respiration, about your respiratory system, and about your cardiovascular system, and reading books about how your sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems are working to protect you, keep you safe. And sometimes I'd cry reading them because, you know, the human body is just such an incredible, it's an amazing thing. And I just ruined, you know, tried to damage mine for so long. I felt so guilty. So I used to be, I still do to this point really, get a bit emotional reading just how fascinating the body is and how perfect it is, really.
Yeah, how it's always trying to keep you safe.
Sure, and I think that's generally where my work is now, really, because the whole thing is based on safety and vulnerability. And you know, we were talking about men's work before, and that's what's kind of led into this. And my work has sort of organically just shifted on its own. And, you know, although I was doing the Wim Hof breathing at the beginning, I realised there was more to it than hyperventilation. There was more to it. So I decided to book a course with Patrick McKeown in Ireland, albeit that was an online course. And then I did my Buteyko instructor training. This was probably maybe about 18 months, 2 years ago. That I decided just to go down the science side of it, as opposed to the sort of spiritual, you know, because I had, you know, at the time I thought, well, I'd really love to study more about the breath. You know, do I go to Greece or do I go to some of these places in Europe that are doing these, you know, this pranayama and soma and, you know, and these breath, the alchemy of breath and some of these, you know, these courses that are talking a lot about spirituality and energy and chakras, and or do I go down the scientific sort of biochemical route, which is where I decided to go at the finish. That's a train, by the way, just going past by.
I wondered.
It's right up on that viaduct up there.
It's an asteroid.
Sure. So yeah, so I did that. I studied with Patrick McKeown, and he's amazing. What that guy doesn't know about respiratory health is not worth knowing. He's a very, very knowledgeable and a great guy. I'm going to go and see him again in February in Ireland, doing my advanced oxygen advantage training with him, and that's going to take off in 2023. It's going to be massive. So I'm really looking forward to that.
Amazing. Have you met Jacko?
I'm meeting Jacko on the 15th of December. We're all meeting up, Hannah Goff and Thingy Owens, what's his name?
Owens? Yeah. Owen Jackson.
Owen Jackson, that's it. He's going to be there as well, and Luke from the Ice Bath Company, he's going to be there, and a few others. So, yeah, it'd be nice to meet Jacko because he does some amazing work with this breath work.
Yeah, he is. Yeah, he's talking about it in a different way, different energy. I feel he gives his own kind of flavour to it, as everyone does.
Yeah,
it's beautiful. Do you know what I love? Getting out of all the kind of for argument's sake, they're health professionals. You know, people that are in that space trying to really help and heal people from a place of, you know, grounded essence. Let's say, I love talking to breathwork coaches because there's just a resonance there. And there's just a humanness and they kind of all get it in their own way, but they're humble most of the time, connected, and they just kind of see things in a more holistic way, of course.
Sure.
But there's something just unique about people who go into the breath hard and are like, right, this is it now. This is it for me, because it's just something that's so simple, but it's also so vast.
Sure.
and you can do a lot with it. But I just, similar to why I wanted to get you on, and why I jump at the chance to getting people to
Sure.
talk about the breath for a living.
Sure. I mean, yeah, and it is simple, and it's something obviously that we do. 30,000 times a day we're taking a breath, but I could sit here for an hour explaining an inhale alone. So not simple, and with there's more and more science and investigation that's going into breath and how it's affecting the animal, how it's affecting the organism, as opposed to the human aspect of it. And I always try and, when I speak to clients, I try and take away the human aspect of it, because obviously a lot of people come to me, they're sort of, oh, she did this and he did that and they did this to me, and it's tough, because people are carrying trauma, but that trauma is connected specifically to their breath. And the more we investigate things like the pre-Botzinger complex in the brain and the medulla and the amygdala, and how it's connected to your breathing and the gasp reflex and breath holding during times of stress and trauma, the body remembers it, it keeps it. So your breath adjusts in every environment that you step into. When you stepped in here, your breathing would have adjusted. When you got out of your van, it adjusts. It's there every step of the way, from the first breath that you take, the first gasp that you ever take when you come out, to the last breath that you let go of, that you exhale when you go. So it's an intrinsic part of our existence as animals, is the breath, and it uses it sometimes in not a very nice way, to get us out of so-called danger. But a lot of the time, the people that I'm working with, I think most of them are interoceptively anxious. It's not external environment that's causing the problem, really. It's what's going on inside them, really.
Their perception of it.
Their perception of it, yeah.
But I guess that comes from a physiological response, which could be quite, natural in one sense, quite primal.
Sure.
But then that can affect how you view it.
Sure.
When in reality it's different.
For sure, yeah. And it only takes something really simple, maybe you had an umbilical cord wrapped around your neck when you were a baby. Maybe you're one of twins and you were the second one. So did you struggle? Was your struggle a little bit more than the other? Did you get less oxygen? How does that affect the animal, going through life? When we bring babies out through cesarean section, does that affect their fear response as a human, because they've not been through the stress of the birth canal? There's questions that we need to ask.
I think half the people in this country now are being born by C-section.
Sure. So what does that do to the animal? Because we're bypassing the stress, the stressor, and is that making people more clingy? Is it making babies more clingy? Do we perceive fear differently because we've not had the stress of the birth canal? There's a lot more science, I think, that needs to go into how we react as human beings, and just exactly what's going on. Eye movement. How our eyes are intrinsically connected to environment, and how we breathe in sort of unison, really, with the eye movement, which is how sort of EMDR kind of works, I think, isn't it? In a way, eye movement is so important as well. Not just breath work, but moving your eyes in a certain way whilst breathing in a certain way can invoke or regret a sort of certain emotions in human beings. So I think this is just the start of it, Chris, isn't it? I think you know that, and I think most people who are listening to this podcast, this is just the start of a movement that's it's going to get huge. And self-healing and self-help is going to be the go-to, as opposed to too easily going to the doctors. And there's a lot of doctors that are Googling at the moment, and I hear this quite a lot. I've taken GPs into the cold, and I've done sessions with general practitioners. Some of them I asked, which is the best way to breathe, and some of them answered either through the nose or the mouth. So what's being missed? We should be breathing through our noses, and they should definitely know the answer to that, really. So I think there's a bit of a shift. I think that people are not really finding the medical profession all that reliable, and I think that's connected to the shift.
Yeah, I think as Zach Bush talks about, it kind of had to happen this way. And,
Yeah.
you know, it's actually it can be seen as a real good positive thing, because we've gone too far in one direction. We've given our power away for so long, and we do need to take that power back. And that's not in a narcissistic or like aggressive way. It's like, no, of course you want to be powerful. We are powerful. We're born powerful. We need to be taking that power back that we have given away.
Sure.
And we notice it all the time, where people do go and outsource their own intelligence, their own intuition, to try and resolve it externally, whether it's in a tablet form or in a pamphlet form or an information. You go to the doctor and you get told what to do. You really want to be told what to do. And we're going to, that doctor represents a bigger system, which is a corporation, and we're letting corporations dictate what it means to be human, right? And just to your point, in the last 50 years or so, we're not going to the local person in the neighborhood anymore to, oh, you had experience with that, like, talk to me, what went on here.
Sure.
We're not doing it person to person anymore, human to human. We're not in the village and we're talking to neighbors and family members around, okay, yeah, we've got a remedy for that, or we know this works. We've lost that.
Sure. And how important was it?
Yeah.
It was massive, really.
Yeah, because we felt like it's in our hands, you know.
Sure.
Mm.
And I think, you know, the shift is a good thing. You know, I'm not saying, obviously, you know, I'm not sort of, you know, poo-pooing medication, obviously not, because it's just amazing, and you know, and it's you know, where we've come in the last 100 years, last 50 years, you know, specifically, you know, with medication is just incredible. It's amazing. But there are other ways of looking at our health first before we're just so quick to jump with sticking plasters and, you know, to quote, you know, sticking plasters and medications that are not really sorting the initial problem, which at the moment appears to be chronic stress.
Yeah, it's acute management for chronic stress, right?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I'm just going to make sure. I'm just going to put a bit of wood on this fire, mate.
Yeah, for sure.
Keep us warm.
Yes, I'd love to actually talk to you about the ladybird on the XLR. Look at that. Beautiful.
There's been loads of those ladybirds in here.
I think they're following me.
Well, they come in from the warmth, and there's mice that come in here at night, and I have to put everything up high because the mice come in and they start trying to make nests out of everything. So they're just trying to get warm, aren't they?
They're just trying to keep safe.
Yeah, exactly. Absolutely. Just like we are, exactly.
Yeah.
You know, so
how much can we learn from nature, you know? It's just all around us.
This
That's
is the
in the
thing.
healing, right? Let's just pay attention.
this is the thing, paying attention. You know, what is that? What is paying attention? You know, as human beings now, we're constantly in our heads all the time, and it's causing so many problems. You know, we're never present, and you know, these things are, you know, making it worse. And I say this to all my clients, and you know, these sort of 7-second environments that we're creating, even watching television or watching films, and we're kind of physically in the body, we're experiencing what's going on in these computer games and films and environments. You know, 1 second you can be looking at a panda being born, which is, oh, this is so cute, and you know, you swipe up, then you'll see people being swept along a beach, you know, with a tsunami, and people being killed. And you know, the teenagers and people that are watching these things on these devices, they're actually experiencing a little bit of adrenaline rush when they see it. So what are they supposed to do with that constant adrenaline in the body? It increases cortisol levels, and they can't get rid of it. That's why ADHD is rife, you know, because you know, kids and teenagers, they're constantly in their heads. They're never present. They're constantly in false environments, you know, and in a recent study in America, 80% of children with ADHD are mouth breathers. They're snoring at night. And we just accept snoring is normal, you know. There's emojis for it. You know, the old man was snoring, and
Yeah, it's like a fairy tale or something, isn't it?
Sure.
It's very normalised.
Normalised, and it isn't. You know, it's dysfunctional in human beings to snore.
I was at a gong bath last night, and there was a snorer.
Sure, that's normally me. That would have been me.
Would have, yeah. Yeah, and I was like, what do you do in this situation? Do you go and make some noise around where they are? Or it's just like holding that space when you know it's a real disrupting sound.
Just go and close the mouth, and generally...
Okay, everyone, when you walk in the room, can you tape your mouths, please?
Yeah, absolutely.
And then we'll begin.
Sure, and why not? Yeah, everybody, which is what I tell all my clients to do, is tape up. And I tape up every night, you know, because I was a prolific snorer all my life, and you know, I was constantly waking up in the morning with a dry mouth and feeling groggy in the morning. When I started to do this work with Patrick McKeown, he said, "Oh, you know, you tape your mouth closed at night, Kev." And I tried it. I thought, wow, this is life changing. You know, I was constantly getting up in the night to go to the toilet, and within 3 or 4 days, it stopped. I don't think I've ever been up at 3 o'clock in the morning to go to the toilet. Since maybe 18 months ago.
So how do you feel about taping it every night? Do you taper it off at any point, or do you, excuse the pun, do you start to, you know, because I know with the cold, chatting to you earlier, you don't go in every day, because I've done that, and that becomes your normal also, and I feel different without it, so you play with that, and I do also tape my mouth, but I'll do a few days and then I'll stop, just because I don't necessarily want to rely on it in a way.
Yeah, I think, and in some cases, I think, you know, once you've done it for so long, I think you naturally keep your mouth closed. And some people, in terms of their cranial facial development or the shape of their face and the size of their nasal cavity, they're far more likely to be nasal breathers as opposed to mouth breathers. Unfortunately, I've had asthma for so long, and the shape of my mouth and the shape of my jaw, I'm more likely to snore or sleep with my mouth open. So I don't take the chance, I just tape up. And yeah, I suppose you do kind of rely on it. And when I had a bit of a cold recently, I was telling you about before, you think, am I supposed to tape up here? Or does the body actually want me to breathe through my mouth here? You know, it knows better than we do, the body. Am I bunged up because it wants me to breathe through my mouth? There's still not really enough that we know. So are we doing the right thing by bypassing that? Does the body need us to breathe through our mouths sometimes? So, I know, all questions, but we don't have the answers to them.
I think questions are more powerful than answers. They are. They
For sure.
They're kind of they're playing in life, the dance. One thing I have noticed in my mouth in the morning, and this is really profound, that my jaw aches in a good way. It's like my mouth has got what it's needed. It's almost like my teeth are more aligned, or there's some adjustment going on there because I'm breathing through my mouth. It's so evident. I'm in the morning, I'm like, oh, there's like a ache, like I was wearing a brace or something.
Sure.
It's fascinating.
It is fascinating, and you know, just the position of your tongue in your mouth is important. And there's a lot sort of going on at the moment with dental work and stuff. And James Nestor wrote in his book Breath. He talks about upper cranial facial development in babies that breastfeed and ones that bottle feed, and we've changed a lot about mankind. We make subtle changes and we don't think it makes any difference, but it does, because from an evolutionary perspective, we absolutely it's perfection, really, the human body, to get to where we are now from an evolutionary perspective. So when we make changes, it does affect. And this is why people are so sort of chronically stressed at the moment. It's because we're constantly living in what Sadhguru says is a dream world. What we are constantly is not present ever. And it's very, very difficult to be present all the time, because we have to live, and we know that you have to get back in your van and you have to carry on getting back on the road and stuff. But the van doesn't exist. It does to me, because I can see it. But to you, you can't see it. So it doesn't exist. My wife and my children don't exist. They're not here. And I know that's a very unusual way to, and you couldn't possibly live like that, because we just wouldn't survive like that as human beings. But that's the reality. This is reality. There is nobody in my life but you, Chris.
Makes me feel pretty special.
Makes me feel special, you know, because this is it.
Yeah.
There is nothing else. It doesn't exist. And the podcast doesn't exist, and, you know, YouTube doesn't exist. It's just figments of our imagination. But we can't live life like that. We know we can't. But that's really what they should be teaching kids in schools, as opposed to algebra. And, you know, I'm not having a go at math teachers, but, you know, teaching kids about life and about how they're breathing and their health is just far more important. And I think a lot of Eastern cultures and countries, they teach them about their health far more than we do.
Yeah.
And we base so much emphasis on progression and going to university, learning, becoming this, becoming that, getting this, getting that. You need this, you need that. I want this, I want that. You know, just be for a while. You know, kids aren't allowed to be kids anymore. They're growing up earlier and earlier and earlier. You know, so we're not allowed to be children. And this is why when we do this men's work, and you spoke about doing men's work before, there's something that's obvious, that the minute you get all these men together and you do this work with them, we just become boys again. I just become Kev with Gray's knees and running through the fields and whittling and lighting fires and having a laugh. And we just become children again. Because I think we've probably not had enough of that, really. And I think that's why people are just so stressed, you know, growing up too fast, maybe, as well.
Yeah, you spoke before about this living in the head, which you kind of need to beat that drum harder, don't we? Because it's so important. We live in that very hyper-masculine world, which is very rational and very strategic and structured, and we have to understand, like, the feeling is where the answers lie, really.
Sure.
Truly, for now, for this time.
100%.
And for us men, it's so important. It's so important to sit and to feel and to, not put on that film tonight and just sit and be.
Sure.
You know?
Yeah.
And
100%.
just feel in and just see what comes up, and like all of your answers lie there in that probably pain that it's quite hard to do, in that discomfort. The things that are really hard to do are generally where you need to spend the most time, right?
For sure. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, beautifully put. And just those moments, if it's just 10 minutes, just listening to your breath and feeling your body, which is why sometimes when you do some relaxing, some breathing work with people, I'm so sorry, I'm becoming a bit emotional. Don't be sorry. You know, it's just showing you something, that's all. It's okay, you know. And I was completely wrapped up in this egoic male mindset, this warrior sort of thing, you know, that I was always shadowed by most of my life, as part of addiction as well, and trying to be the tough guy and all this sort of thing, and, you know, all these sort of tattoos, and, you know, and I don't know, I was always sort of a bit trapped, you know. And I think that's probably, there's definitely childhood issues, you know, with me. There's childhood trauma, and when I say trauma, I had a beautiful childhood with an amazing family. My mum and dad were fantastic, and they were brilliant. But there were things that happened when I was a kid that have affected me going through my life. And Gabor Mate talks about this.
Yeah, when you withdraw love, it's trauma.
Absolutely, yeah.
When you hold that back because you feel like you're disciplining, or you need to be hard to be kind, and it's that for a child 0 to 7, it's trauma.
It is trauma, yeah. And although when I was growing up, I had 4 sisters, no brothers, so I had no males around me, and my dad worked every day, and the only day he had off was a Sunday, and he'd disappear and go and play football, and then I'd never see him. Then he'd come back in, have his dinner, and that was it. And that was, you know, that was my life growing up. And I needed a man to go into the garage and to make things. I was quite hands on as a kid, and I remember crying myself to sleep when he went to. I can remember, physically remember. I can see it. Me putting my head, going underneath the covers, and almost crying myself to sleep because he went to football on Sunday, and I was screaming to go with him. I remember it, as you do, and I think that definitely affected me. I didn't know where to fit in as a man then. And I wasn't always connected to my emotional side properly. Whereas now, I couldn't be any more sort of connected to my divine feminine. I would have never cried in front of another man years ago. I would have found that quite difficult. It would have been, quite awkward. Sometimes I'd, be watching telly with the family, and I'd go out of the room because of there's something on the film was making me a bit upset, or I'd swallow it back, and whereas now I just I just let it go because it's what's supposed to be, which is beautiful, really. It's kind of released me, and when you do men's work with people, you find that this is what happens to them when you sort of stand and look at a man that you've never met before this close in the woods. It's like it's a bit intimidating. It's a bit unusual, but what does the body do? It adapts, and it starts to become easier. In fact, it starts to become enjoyable. What? And then we see the boy, see the boy, and it's a beautiful thing, really. And all men should go and do some work, really, especially those ones that are trapped in that egoic mind, because male ego runs the world, and it's awful.
Yeah, powerful. It does. And when you're in those situations, staring into a man's eyes, you see yourself, you see the boy in you, and the person that just wants to be loved and accepted. And that is it. There's not much more than that. You just want to be loved and accepted.
Yeah, absolutely. And to feel safe in that vessel. And you can find that with a complete stranger if you both surrender to it. And that's what we should be teaching our children, is just, wear your heart on your sleeve, surrender, be vulnerable. Because the greatest sources of your strength is your vulnerability. And that's how we find our partners, etc. Because people are attracted to vulnerability. We look for it.
Yeah, it's the precursor to connection, really.
Sure, absolutely. So the more we hold it back, the less safe we feel. And that's why I had so many problems with addiction, was because I didn't feel safe. I felt vulnerable all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas now I feel less vulnerable. Certainly feel less vulnerable than I used to. I still feel vulnerable.
But it's on your terms, I imagine. You can choose rather than it. The physiological sensations that you feel being vulnerable is different to choosing when to lean in and when to actively, be vulnerable in situations.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and obviously now with the work that I do, I recognise it when it comes knocking on the door. When this sort of monkey mind starts, and I start. I have to ask myself sometimes. And I tell everybody, just breathe in for 4 seconds and out for 6 seconds, and just have a look where you sit around 6 seconds. Once you're there again, you're back to self. Once you're back on using this sort of breath as an anchor, how safe are you? And the thing a lot of the time is that we feel so vulnerable sometimes when interoceptively that we feel as though it's real, that vulnerability is real, but we're not vulnerable. We're only vulnerable as the next person, but you've got a roof over your head maybe, and you've got food in your tummy, and you're breathing. And I say to everybody, I said, of all the things that you want and you need, and if I was to empty all the air out of this room, what would you want?
Don't say that. I was in a hyperbaric chamber yesterday.
Yeah, you'd want air.
That hyper stress chamber. I did not enjoy it.
Right. So is that in a hyperbaric?
Yeah. So I've not been in one before. It's at my friend's retreat centre, and you suck all the air out, and you have a mask on with it. It's just kind of 100% oxygen or
Sure.
close to it. And
Sure.
I actually don't know all the benefits, but there are loads. I know there are loads. Apparently, they're extremely expensive just because they need to be super safe, right? Because you
Yeah.
are sucking the air out of, you're decompressing the environment like you would on a plane, or you go in a submarine, because you're going
Sure.
down about 4 meters below sea level, I imagine. Something
It's
like
probably
that.
more than that.
Probably more.
Yeah. Was it a proper chamber? Was it?
Yeah.
A proper
Yeah.
chamber, a steel chamber.
No,
with
it was it was kind of like plastic material, I
with a
guess.
zip.
Yes.
So that's about 2.5. It's probably around about two atmospheres underneath the ocean,
Uh-huh.
which I'm almost certain that it's increased pressure. So it increases the pressure on the outside,
Sure.
so that oxygen is forced into your blood, into the water of your blood.
So, yeah, because there's one thing putting an oxygen mask on with 100% oxygen, but there's another thing being compressed, right?
Sure.
Decompressed, sorry.
Sure, yeah. So there's one in Ashton. It's like a 6-person. It's a proper chamber. They should close the door. It's a steel thing that
Oh,
they
wow.
use, the divers practice with, etc.,
Mm.
etc. And that, so you start to feel hot because because it's increasing the pressure. Your ears pop. You have to sort of blow down your nose a little bit just to level out really with the pressure. But yeah, the idea of that is that you're forcing oxygen into your blood, and obviously oxygen is critical for every cell in your body needs oxygen. So, which begs the question: why are they not telling people to breathe in such a manner that you're getting more oxygen, which is through the nose?
Yeah.
Which is obviously where all my work is now. It's all based on biochemistry, biomechanics, and the amount of air that we're breathing as human beings, and it's critical, to health and to homeostasis. Because if you hyperventilate, you're not getting oxygen. You're getting rid of too much carbon dioxide, and this is affecting the Bohr effect in the body.
Exactly. We need the carbon dioxide to allow us to absorb the oxygen, right?
For sure, yeah, absolutely. And Christie's still send people with cancer into hyperbaric chambers because they know that a lot of cancers don't survive in oxygen.
Yeah.
So why aren't they telling us to breathe in such a manner that our bodies get more oxygen?
Sure.
Which is through the nose, and by breathing longer, slower, and deeper breaths to engage vagal tone and to improve the gas exchange. So that oxygen is getting into the bloodstream, and not only that, it's getting to the brain. Because if you reduce carbon dioxide enough, you're dramatically reducing oxygen flow to the brain, which is why mental health is directly connected to hyperventilation or chronic hyperventilation syndrome.
And what part does nitric oxide play? Because when we breathe through the nose, we tap into I guess more parasympathetic receptors in the lower lungs.
Sure.
I mean, correct me if I'm speaking
No.
not non-truths here.
The little ladybirds on your leg there.
Oh, really? It was on your headphones for about 20 minutes.
Oh, was it really? It's making its way around. I think there's probably more than one. But yeah, nasal nitric oxide, first discovered on a breath in 1991, I think, on an outward breath of a human. Nitric oxide is a natural vasodilator. And when we breathe through the nose, we're probably producing 10 to 15% more nitric oxide than when we breathe through the mouth. And when we breath holding, it's pooling nitric oxide in the nasal cavity, so that when you take that breath in, you're taking nitric oxide down into the small air sacs of the lungs, the alveoli, and it's helping to dilate blood vessels, and it aids in the gas exchange because of this dilation. So everybody should know this. Everybody should know that nitric oxide is also antiviral. So I think in America they were using nitric oxide with COVID patients. So why aren't we told to breathe through the nose and these humming exercises? Humming creates more nitric oxide in the nasal cavity. This billiard ball shaped cavity above. In the back of in your head, which is your nasal cavity, which one scientist thought we probably has about sort of 30 individual functions in the body. The nose, it compresses air. It's the narrower passage, So it regulates air pressure going down into the lungs. The mouth is just a gateway, an opening into the lungs. The nose is specifically the first line of defence against anything that's airborne. So any pathogens or pollen or viral infection, COVID, you know. There's not much science to suggest that you wouldn't get COVID, but you've probably got a much better chance of not getting it if it's caught in the nasal cavity, in these spirals and turbinates and flaps of skin and mucus and hairs. You're more likely to catch this stuff and sneeze it or cough it out and swallow it back, as opposed to just taking it straight down into the lungs. So
into the chest.
Straight into the chest. Absolutely. So, you know, breathe through your nose, and the likelihood is that you're probably a lot less likely on public transport to get some of these illnesses, or influenza, flu, or viruses by breathing through the nose. The problem is that, you know, the powers that be know that, you know, if they ask everybody to start breathing through their nose, the A&E would be full of people with panic attacks and anxiety, because people have been breathing through their mouths for so long that their chemoreceptor sensitivity to carbon dioxide won't allow them to breathe through a narrower passage. They'll be gasping for breath because it'll feel as though they're suffocating, which is where, you know, our work as breath coaches comes in, you know, explaining the biochemistry and getting people to change their chemoreceptor sensitivity to carbon dioxide.
That's interesting. So talk me through a session with someone who, say, if you've never met them before, they came here, you know, they booked a one-on-one. What would you go through with them in a couple of hours, say?
Well, yeah, and this is all sort of going to change a little bit, really, because I think some of my sessions are a little bit too informative, really. There's just so much information to get through. It's unbelievable. And like I say, for 2 hours, it can be a bit of a bombardment of information, because some of it's, you know, complex biochemistry. So I don't go too much into the science of it, but I explain to everybody when I bring them in to do a session. If it's a transformative session, then it's different, because I'm getting people to stress. I'm getting people to breathe through their mouths generally, to put them into stress, because that's what it's for. Whereas obviously Buteyko and Oxygen Advantage is about getting people to breathe through their noses primarily. Some people can't breathe through their noses. So, you know, people, you know, asthmatics and things, that they generally have quite bunged up noses. So there's just such a variation of people that I get in client-wise, you know, at the moment. So I don't really know where my work is at the moment sometimes. It's all over the place. There's still a huge amount of people that want to get in the cold. You know, it's a bit of a fad, I think, at the moment, the cold. Everybody wants to get in it. But I don't necessarily think that people are understanding exactly what it's doing. So basically, if I brought you in to do a session, I would explain a little bit about your breathing. I'd explain about how I'd basically take you all the way back to birth, really. In fact, even conception, you know, in terms of how the autonomic nervous system is working. And I would take you all the way back to your first breath, to the first time, really, that you ever felt vulnerable after 9 months of being in a parasympathetic state of safety, not even having to breathe or eat for yourself. Everything is provided. You couldn't ever be any more parasympathetic than that, and safe. And then all at once, then you're either forced through a narrow canal or you come out through the top. There is a difference. You're forced through this narrow canal, you take a gasp, you're cold and you're frightened. So your sympathetic drive as a human being, as an animal, has started at that point. And your pre-Botzinger complex, your brain is watching your breathing then. So from that first gasp, it's watching your mouth breathing. Was that one of them then, the lady being? So from that point then, when you're breathing through your mouth, you're cold and you're frightened, you eventually make it back to parasympathetic again. You make it back to safety. And then you change the way that you breathe, because you latch on and you start to eat. And then you start to breathe through your nose. So your nervous system then associates nasal breathing with safety, which is why when you work with people with panic disorder and anxiety, if you can get them to breathe through their nose, they can use nasal breathing to feel safe, which is why when I say to people, breathe in for 4 and then breathe out for 6. Six always feels safe. Your body feels different on one breath. So why don't we use it? Why don't we use it more to help people that are suffering with anxiety and panic disorder? And I think over the next couple of years it's going to be massive. But I take you through the whole process, and then I'll get them to do some breathing exercises. I'll get them to breathe through straws, so that they can feel what air hunger feels like. Some people can't breathe through a straw for any more than 10 seconds. Yeah, whereas some people, they find it quite comfortable. So it's trying to see where people sit with carbon dioxide. So then I'll test them. I'll test to see. I'll do a BOLT score with them, which is a body oxygen level test, to see where their sensitivity is to CO2. And hopefully once they've done a session with me, and we'll do some breath work. We'll do some connective breath work. And obviously breath work's massive now. What is breath work? It's just breathing, really.
With intention. It's
breathing with intention. This is the thing, yeah, and connecting to how that feels. And more often than not, I take people through a brief meditation so that they can, some body mapping whilst they're breathing, but I get them to feel real subtle changes in the body. When you breathe in, I want you to feel your skin on your clothing move as you breathe in. I want you to feel very subtle movements in the body. I want you to connect to things that are very, very, very subtle. And this way you find a very deep connection that you don't get with you get with hyperventilation. I mean, eventually you do, because you get rid of so much carbon dioxide that you remove any drive to breathe. But I think also there's a part of it where your body goes into shutdown. Some people are becoming so hypoxic with Wim Hof breathing that sometimes their SpO2 is at like sort of 20%. One guy said the other day on a course I was on, that his SpO2 is at 20%. I mean, it's going a bit too far. Some of that, I think. It's got to be done safely.
What's the SpO2?
So the blood the monitors, monitoring your oxygen saturation in your body.
Yeah, you can buy them for quite cheap, can't you?
You can buy them quite cheap. Yeah, cheap ones are cheap. You can buy some that are £100 and you get what you pay for with these things. Although some of they're pretty accurate. These SpO2 monitors, maybe 25-30 quid, and get yourself quite a decent one. But generally, your blood oxygen saturation should be somewhere between sort of 93, 97, 99%, ideally. Once it drops below a certain level, if it goes into its 80s, then you've got to ask a question why that is, unless you're holding your breath or you're restricting oxygen flow in the body, which is what you're doing if you're holding your breath. So sometimes sometimes I do some apnea training, which means you're sort of holding your breath in certain patterns, O2 tables and CO2 tables, and I do these generally most days just to keep my tolerances up to a certain level, which are not really, my BOLT score's only sort of between sort of 28 and 30 seconds generally. But when I first started, it was about 9 seconds. So I had a strong drive to breathe when I first started. Which is why when I tried to exercise breathing through my nose, I think I only made about 500 yards before taking the tape off. And oh God, this isn't possible. And within, I don't know, probably 4 months, 5 months, something like that, I think, I'd run a half marathon taped up. So proof that you can change your biochemistry. And I don't run with inhalers anymore, and I wouldn't dream of heading out exercising without an inhaler for most of my life. So it's been completely life-changing, Chris, the breath.
Were you taking out inhalers when in your adulthood?
Yeah. I wouldn't go anywhere without it. I'd almost be panicking looking for an inhaler, but I don't use them at all anymore. Yeah. So.
I think when I spend time with talking about the breath, it always reconnects you to it, of course, because it directs your attention there. So yeah, it's worth it. It's really worth paying attention. It's like one of the most, it's the most simple thing you can do to change your life.
For sure.
You
And
know?
it's there, it's yours, it's connected to you. But your breath it's as unique as your DNA. It's completely yours. And there's no two human beings have ever been breathing the same way, which is why it's so intrinsically connected to the past and to your trauma, because your autonomic nervous system uses it as a tool to mobilize you, to get you back to safety. And how does it do that? Well, it picks the thing that makes you frightened the most, because that's the most reliable source of where you don't want to go back to. So whenever you're in a situation where your body feels as though it's under threat, or your brain thinks that you're under threat, it'll quickly take you straight back, maybe to a time where you felt the most vulnerable. So that's why the organism has to remember that in terms of the body keeps the score. It has to. Otherwise you'd be dead already. It's the origins of anxiety. And that's connected to CO2, believe it or not, and the amygdala. And there's a science paper by Justin Feinstein, I think his name is. Mm-hmm. And a really, really interesting paper about, about your chemoreceptor sensitivity to CO2. If the better your Bolt score is, basically, and the less reactive you are to carbon dioxide, the less anxious you'll be as a person. So there's lots of work to be done with this. But unfortunately, it's not quick fix. And that's why I think people are, so focused in on the Wim Hof method, which is an amazing thing. It really, really is. And it's helping so many people to reconnect back to their bodies all over the world. There are huge amounts of people who cannot do the Wim Hof method because they're suffering with PTSD or trauma, and they try and breathe like that, and the body will take them straight back to it. So that they freak out or they burst into tears the minute they start. Why? Because when they were going through their trauma, they were...
Yeah. It's interesting because some people in this space feel like that's good, it's great, it's important.
Sure.
Let's do that. Let's invoke these feelings. Let's bring it out. Let it out. But then it's what we do with that when it comes,
Sure.
And what you're saying is when it does come, is it effective? Is it helping us? Or is it just taking us back to a situation where we felt lost and helpless and we're just experiencing that again?
Sure.
So what do you do in that situation where, or would you say to someone what's the path to go down once you're feeling overwhelmed and the breathwork's helping, assisting you getting there?
Sure.
Not using the word helping, but it's assisting that experience, like coming back to the surface.
Sure.
What's the kind of protocol there?
Well, the thing is that the breath is reliable. It has to be, and your nervous system has to be reliable. Otherwise, like I said, you'd be dead already. If it didn't make you cry when you came out to get back to your mother, from that point, and when they put you in your cot and you realise that you're alone,
Sure.
You have to be vocal. So, and your breathing is connected to that, obviously, as well. So, if it didn't do any of that, we wouldn't have evolved. So, it is reliable, the breath. It takes you straight back, unless sometimes people start to try and control that, and they try to push things away. And sometimes the nervous system, if something happens to you that's really bad, it'll push away any thoughts or memories connected to it. Sometimes when you do a breath session, a transformative breath session, you'll see an image of it sometimes, because basically your body doesn't want you to hyperventilate.
Yeah.
It just wants you to be like this. It wants you to feel relatively safe all the time. So when you start hyperventilating, it tries to find as many ways as possible to get you to stop. And if you won't stop, it'll show you something to get you to stop, which is why when you watch these programs on telly, the Wim Hof program on telly, I think it was Gabby Logan, was it? The presenters, you burst into tears, hysterical tears, and the footballer, Patrice Evra, is it? this is regression. It's going back because the body is so, it's its wit's end with you breathing the way that you're breathing. It thinks you're dying, basically, which is why sometimes you get some DMT release, which is this, I always forget the wording of DMT. Do you know?
Dimethyltryptamine.
Tryptamine. Yeah, that's the one. So you release this chemical from the pineal gland, which is what they think is released when you're dying, maybe to help your passage to be a little bit easier. You see bright lights and you smell certain things and you feel warm and fuzzy, and you know, or is that the last ditch attempt for the body to try and get you to reset? Or sometimes when you're doing your breath work, sometimes people pass out. Fainting and passing out is a excuse me, it's a reset. It's an attempt for your nervous system to say, look, I've had enough of that now, reset you. Which is why you can't do Wim Hof breathing underwater, because if you do hyperventilating before you go underwater and you pass out, when you come back round again, you gasp and you drown. And that's happened in America with people doing cyclic hyperventilation. So going back to your original question, so when you start to feel these, or see these images, or feel these certain emotions and feelings, you feel vulnerable, and sometimes it will show you that vulnerability. When I've done breath sessions with men and women, they see things that they'd forgotten about. It's like, why did I see that? Well, you've seen it for a reason. Just make a note of it, journal it, think about what happened. And then a lot of the time they come back to me afterwards, because I stay in contact with them for a good few days afterwards to make sure that they're okay. Because by bringing these things to the surface, you've got to be careful with people, because they're gentle. And there might be reasons why they've pushed all this stuff away all their lives. But the likelihood is that in terms of the body keeping the score, when things happen to us as adults, we might be feeling the emotion of a 7-year-old boy when we see it. So that fear we're getting might be something that's connected to the past, as opposed to something that's in us now. So emotionally, we might be feeling like a 6-year-old. And a 6-year-old is much more vulnerable than a 40-year-old. So that's the general idea of it. So what it's enabling you to do is to reprocess it. It's a bit like downloading new software, really.
So there is a bit of a mission on our hands in terms of invoking these states, going into these experiences to allow our body to access parts of ourselves which, say our body's throwing a memory our way.
Sure.
That to try and get us out of this state.
Sure.
But it's doing that to bring your body and your awareness back down to here and now and get your breathing back.
For sure, yeah.
But it's doing that and throwing those memories your way to we can use that, we can use that information.
We can, yeah. And I think as long as people are, because at the moment everybody wants to be a breath coach, everybody wants to be a breathing instructor. These big companies are out there, they're making a killing out of trying to tell everybody to be a breathing instructor. And sometimes people are going to these big breathing events when they're all breathing in a big room, big groups of people.
Yeah, well, that's the risk, and then they leave, and then it's like, what do you do with that? It's the integration. It's the same. It's the same as all these things, right?
Sure.
How are we integrating that experience?
Absolutely, and that's the most important part of it, because sometimes
I'm going to create an integration centre. Come on.
Absolutely, yeah. It's a great idea, because it's afterwards. It's okay while you're here, and we'll talk about it. Let's have a drink. Then you go back, and then you get in your car, and it's you again. So it starts then. It's like, that. And this is what the brain will do. And if you're not careful with it, some people can go and do a breath session, and it can make them suicidal when they go home. Especially if they go back and they're on their own. I always say to people, if you go back, make sure that you're with somebody. Don't go back to work, because you're going to need a little bit of time to to process what it is that you've just been through and what you've just seen potentially for the first time in 20 odd years. That's a lot. So you have to be so gentle with people. And, sometimes big, deep, heavy breathing isn't always the way to start. It always gets results. And there's a lot of breath coaches out there now that are pushing people very hard.
We want results.
Because everybody wants results straight away. Take it easy. It's taken 30 odd years to put that there. You're not going to release. You're not going to rebirth. I hate these sayings. I don't like rebirth. Who are you being? How are you being reborn? Come on. There's stupid sayings. Release. You don't release trauma. If you could release it, then everybody would release it. Your nervous system won't allow you to release trauma, because if it did, you'd be dead already. Because your defense mechanism would be faulty. You can't release anything. You can see it. You can re-witness it. You can readjust how you process that trauma, but you won't release trauma. It's not possible. And Bessel van der Kolk would probably back me up on that, in saying that you can't release trauma forever. It'll always be part of your fascia, your body, and in your mind.
It needs to be.
It needs to be there. You need to come to terms with your trauma, process it. It happened, but you won't release it, and you won't be reborn. So they're not rebirth sessions.
I love it. Let's end it there. I love that. Amazing. You won't be reborn.
No, not in that form. No.
No, I understand. Thank you for your time, brother.
Thank you.
Really
for your
appreciate
time.
it for stoking the fire and tending to that. And thanks for inviting me here. It's been beautiful. Thanks for your honesty and vulnerability as well.
Thank you. It's been great. For yours, mate. Yeah, it's been lovely to meet you. Yeah,
really appreciate it. Do you want to direct anyone? Where's the best place people can connect with you online, Instagram, or what have you got coming up as well that you're excited about?
Yeah, well, I'm excited about working with Patrick McKeown in February. I'm doing a 3-day course doing the Oxygen Advantage. It's going to be massive. Oxygen Advantage in 2023, and breathwork is in general. And and not just from a spiritual point of view or trauma, just health in general. And I would say to everybody, breathe and look into your breath, and and breathe healthily, because it's affecting your health. If you need any more information, you can go to breatheolution.com, or you can go to Instagram, and I've got some stuff on there. I'm going to be putting out a lot more information on Instagram, because people, I think that I'm this sort of this cold water therapist, and that's all that I do. I take people in the cold. I'm primarily a breath coach, and I work with autonomic dysfunction through overbreathing, which most people are doing, believe it or not. I would say probably 80% of people are hyperventilating. So basically, I'm looking forward to this year. I'm going to be doing some retreats and getting involved with. I think we spoke to a bit before with the youth in Derby as well, some teenagers and young offenders. So I'm really looking forward to working with them, because they need rescuing. Do
you know Tim Sheaf? He's in Derby. You should connect with him, because he does stuff. He does lots of outdoor walks and stuff with younger groups and stuff. Yeah.
I mean, he may even be involved in this.
He might be, yeah.
This thing that's going on. But we're all having a bit of a get together in January. So I'm really looking forward to that next year. And working with schools, really. I'm desperate to get into schools. It's not about the cold. I won't be telling anybody to get into the cold. It's about your breathing.
Well, I'm glad this is where this conversation went, because I just love talking about the cold. But this is where it needed to be, I feel.
For sure, yeah. The cold is amazing. If you want an environment that's going to make your body feel vulnerable, then the cold is fashionably reliable at that. But you have to be breathing in a certain way when you do it. There are still some Wim Hof instructors out there who are still on their breath through their mouth when they're getting in the cold. And people are going to these Wim Hof sessions, and they're still puffing and panting for 2 or 3 minutes in the cold, and they get out and they move about and they're running around all over the place. They're not really connecting with it. The way to get into the cold is to be connected to your breath. Your breathing should be slow. Your hands shouldn't be closed. This is showing the nervous system that you're frightened. And, you shouldn't ever get into the cold like this or like this. This is fear. You should always get in open. Don't show that you're frightened, otherwise that's how you'll feel when you're in there. You'll go into your head a lot more if you're inward. Yeah,
your postures have a huge impact on your physiology.
Massive.
What's going on with power postures? There was a study on it. It was a fascinating study how people just acted in a certain way, and their kind of in their inner world, just kind of, you know, different hormones and all sorts.
It's huge. And eye closure as well. I witnessed so much closure of the eyes, you know, and going inward, you know, maybe another mechanism of the nervous system to get you to step away from the environment is to go inward. So when people go in the cold, they tend to keep their hands out and they close their eyes. They're going inside. You know, is eye closure connected to trauma? I think it is. It's connected to the past, because a lot of the time we close our eyes when we're frightened.
Yeah.
So we need to look a bit more into that as well. And I've certainly witnessed that a lot going into the cold. People close their eyes. I said, open your eyes, accept this environment. Don't close your eyes.
Absolutely. And if you're getting in and you're coming out after a minute and you're not letting go of that, if you're not relaxing in that environment, then you're just getting into a stressful situation and coming out stressed. It just makes zero sense.
Exactly. And that's what's happening in these Wim Hof events, you know, all over the country. And not all of them. There's some, I'm sure there's some absolutely incredible, amazing instructors. But there's a lot of people that are just going in, they're doing a lot of heavy breathing, they're getting in the cold. It's costing them a lot of money, you know, and it seems to be a big money thing, the Wim Hof thing, which is not, I know it's not Wim Hof's sort of idea. It's just, you know, I think it's his son that's sort of exploded it on the sort of global scale that it's at. But, you know, people just need to connect a little bit more with it and, you know, accept the environment as opposed to being all revved up all the time. You know, when I bring people out of the cold, I get them to stand there, and if it's a bit windy, they're going to cover up straight away. I'm like, whoa, stand with it. Just sit with it. You don't cover up yet. You're okay. Oh, yeah, but it's gone cold. Yeah, I know it is. Okay, just sit with it. You're going to be fine. You're going to be okay. Just stand there and surrender to it. It's okay. And then maybe do some movement, but let your body just regulate. Let your body adapt. And I think that's where it's proving to be hugely beneficial, because you don't leave that in the cold then, do you? You take it with you, and it's building mental and physical resilience in other stressful situations.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think it's the same with the dark as well. Like, just being okay with being in the dark and trying to hide from it. Turn on the lights quickly. Just let it. Sometimes
Absolutely.
It's okay.
I love that, yeah. But I say to everybody, you know, get in a tank, get in the river, get in a reservoir, get in a lake, get in the dark, getting in the cold and the dark will switch your nervous system. It'll do different things. Go in with other people, go in on your own. Now, these people that go to these big events, they're all co-regulating, and they're all here smiling at other people. You know, when they go home, they get into the cold bath. It's like, oh God, that feels different. Why? Because you're on your own. You've got to experience the cold on your own, because you're on your own. The minute they cut the cord, that's you. So come to terms with it, you know, and use the cold. It's amazing. It's a great tool.
Beautiful. All right, let's wrap it up, brother. Thank you, man.
Superb, mate. Thank you so much.